I never thought my own daughter would try to destroy me. I'm Eleanor Whitman, 71 years old, and I spent 40 years as a federal prosecutor, putting away con artists, embezzlers, and fraudsters. I've interrogated the best liars this country has produced. But when your only child reaches out after 3 years of silence, you don't think like a prosecutor. You think like a mother, like a fool with hope in her heart. The text came on a Thursday morning. "Mom, can we have coffee? Saturday, 10 a.m. at the house? I miss you." My hands shook as I read it. 3 years. 3 years since Victoria had cut me out of her life, and now this. I should have known better. I should have recognized the setup. But I wanted so badly to believe my daughter still loved me. I chose my outfit carefully that Saturday. The silk blouse Victoria had given me for my 65th birthday, back when she still called me Mom with warmth in her voice, back when we were still family. The house stood there in its Pacific Heights glory, all Victorian elegance and bay windows, probably worth close to $4 million now. I'd signed it over to Victoria and her husband Marcus as a wedding gift 8 years ago. I thought I was being generous, helping them start their life together. Now I lived in a small condo in the Sunset District, but that was fine. Mothers sacrifice for their children, right? My finger was inches from the doorbell when the door opened slightly. Carmen stood there. My former housekeeper, who'd worked for me for 25 years and had stayed on with Victoria and Marcus. Her dark eyes were wide with something that looked like pure terror. "Mrs. Whitman," she whispered, her voice shaking, her fingers wrapping around my wrist like iron. "Don't go inside. Please, you need to leave right now. They've set a trap." I stared at her, my brain struggling to process her words. They seemed to come from very far away. "Carmen, what are you talking about?" "Please." Her grip tightened until it hurt. "Trust me, you have to go. Hide across the street behind the neighbor's fence. Watch, you'll understand. Mrs. Whitman, please, I'm begging you." Something in her voice, that raw panic, made the decision for me. I stepped back, still clutching my purse like a lifeline, and moved quickly across the street to hide behind the tall wooden fence surrounding the neighbor's garden. I felt ridiculous, a former federal prosecutor crouching behind a fence like a criminal. But I stayed there, my knees protesting, and watched my former home. 7 minutes. That's all it took for my entire world to shatter into pieces I'd never be able to put back together. 2 police cars pulled up, lights flashing but no sirens. 4 officers emerged, hands near their weapons. Faces set with that particular expression cops get when they expect trouble. They walked to the front door with careful, measured steps. The door flew open. Victoria stood there, and even from across the street, I could see she'd been crying, or pretending to cry. Her sweater was torn at the neckline. Mascara streaked down her face. She looked like a victim, and my prosecutor's instinct kicked in automatically, cataloging the scene, recognizing the performance. My stomach dropped into a bottomless pit. One of the officers spoke to her. She gestured inside frantically, then pointed toward where I should have been standing, where I would have been if Carmen hadn't stopped me. The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. They weren't expecting me for coffee. They were expecting me for something else entirely. A trap, a setup, a frame job. My own daughter had invited me here to destroy me. I watched as the officers searched the house. I watched as Victoria kept touching her torn sweater, kept wiping her eyes, kept playing the terrified victim. I watched as Marcus appeared in the doorway. His face, a perfect mask of confusion and concern and fear. "My son-in-law?" The man who'd called me mom at their wedding, who'd promised to take care of my daughter? The man who was currently part of a conspiracy to frame me for something. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to press them against the fence to steady myself. I couldn't feel my legs anymore. Couldn't feel anything except a cold, burning rage settling into my bones like ice turning to steel. After 40 minutes, the police left. I stayed hidden for another 30, watching as lights turned on and off in my former home. My gift, my sacrifice. Finally, when my knees absolutely refused to support me any longer, I crept back to my car and drove home. I don't remember the drive back to my condo. I don't remember parking or taking the elevator to the 8th floor or unlocking my door. I remember sitting in the dark of my living room, a room that could fit inside just the kitchen of the house I'd given away, and staring at the city lights blinking through my window. My daughter had tried to set me up. The words kept repeating in my mind like a recording I couldn't stop. My daughter, my only child, the baby I'd raised alone after her father died when she was 6. What had they planned? What would have happened if I'd walked through that door? The torn sweater, the tears, the police already on their way. It wasn't hard to piece together. They were going to accuse me of assault. Maybe say I'd attacked Victoria in a rage. Something that would get me arrested, humiliated, destroyed, my reputation burned to ash. But why? I sat there in the dark and felt something inside me harden into diamond. 40 years as a prosecutor teaches you patience. It teaches you that justice isn't always swift, but it can be absolute. They wanted to destroy me. They'd underestimated who they were dealing with. I was Eleanor Whitman. I'd spent 4 decades watching criminals try to outsmart the system. I knew every law, every loophole, every precedent, every way the justice system could protect the innocent or crush the guilty. And my daughter and her husband had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my single armchair and watched the city transform from night to dawn, thinking about all the moments I'd missed, all the warning signs I'd ignored, because I wanted to believe in my daughter, wanted to believe in the goodness I'd tried so hard to instill in her. 8 years ago, Victoria's wedding day had been the happiest day of my life since my husband died. I'd walked her down the aisle, filling both parental roles, and I'd seen nothing but joy in her eyes. Marcus had seemed perfect, handsome, educated, charming, a software engineer with stock options and ambition. I remembered the rehearsal dinner. "Mom," Victoria had said, pulling me aside into the garden, "I want you to know that Marcus and I have been talking. We want you to feel like the house is still yours. You built it with Dad. We'll never forget that." I'd gotten emotional, embarrassingly so for a woman who prided herself on courtroom composure. "Sweetheart, this house is yours now. Build your life here. Build your family here. That's all I want." Marcus had hugged me that night. "You're the mother I never had, Eleanor," he'd whispered. "I promise I'll take care of Victoria. We'll take care of each other." Pretty words. Poison wrapped in silk and tied with a bow. The first sign came 8 months after the wedding. Thanksgiving. I'd always hosted Thanksgiving, a tradition from before my husband died. But that year, Victoria called to say they'd be spending it with Marcus's family. "You understand, right, Mom? We need to split time fairly." Fair. I'd nodded over the phone, said of course I understood, and spent the day alone with takeout Chinese food and old photo albums. Christmas came with another excuse. "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry. Marcus thought I'd told you we were doing Christmas at his parents' place this year. We must have gotten our wires crossed." Wires crossed, right. Then came the money requests. Small at first, almost reasonable. Mom, we're renovating the master bathroom. Could you help out? Just 10,000. I'd helped. Of course I'd helped. The roof needs replacing. 25,000 for repairs. Property taxes are crushing us. 15,000? There's this investment opportunity. That's where everything changed. The investment opportunity. Victoria and Marcus had come to my condo together, sat across from me with spreadsheets and projections and promises that sounded too good to be true because they were. It's cryptocurrency, Mom. Early stage. Marcus's company is getting in on the ground floor. We're talking returns that could quadruple our money in 18 months. But we need capital. We need you to invest your pension fund. I'd looked at the papers, looked at my daughter, and seen something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Desperation mixed with something harder, colder. Greed, maybe. Or fear. Victoria, this is my retirement. Everything I have. Exactly. Marcus had leaned forward, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Don't you want it to grow? This is a sure thing. Don't you trust us? That's when I'd felt the trap closing, even though I didn't fully understand it yet. It's not about trust. It's about being smart with money. I've worked too hard to gamble it on something I don't understand. Victoria's face had gone cold. A transformation so sudden, it was like watching a mask drop. You've worked too hard? Mom, we work hard too. But I guess our success doesn't matter as much as your precious savings. The argument had escalated fast, faster than I could control. Victoria had called me selfish, controlling, stuck in the past. Marcus had said I was trying to keep Victoria dependent, trying to prevent her from building real wealth because I was jealous. I defended myself badly, I'll admit. Said things I shouldn't have said. And they'd left. Victoria slamming the door so hard, a picture fell off my wall and shattered. I'd called her the next day to apologize. Left 5 voicemails, sent a dozen texts. Nothing. 2 weeks later, I'd driven to the house. Victoria had answered the door, but hadn't invited me in. Mom doesn't want to see you right now, Eleanor. She'd never called me Eleanor before. Always Mom. The formality cut like a knife. You hurt her deeply. She needs space. And specifically, 3 years of space. 3 years of silence. Of holidays alone. Of birthdays ignored. Of gradual, agonizing grief for a daughter who was still alive but lost to me. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. And sitting in my dark condo after the near miss at the house, I finally understood. It hadn't been about the investment at all. It had been a test. A loyalty test I'd failed by choosing financial prudence over blind obedience. When I'd refused to hand over my life savings, I'd become a problem, an obstacle to whatever plan they were building. And now they wanted to remove that obstacle permanently. I thought about Victoria as a child, 9 years old, learning to swim, terrified of the deep end. She'd clung to the pool edge, crying, saying she couldn't do it. Yes, you can, sweetheart, I told her, treading water beside her. You're stronger than you think. You just have to let go and trust yourself. She'd let go. She'd learned to swim. That brave little girl was gone. In her place was a woman I didn't recognize. A woman controlled by a man who saw people as assets to be leveraged or liabilities to be eliminated. And my daughter had chosen to become his accomplice. The anger I'd felt at the house returned, but colder now, more calculated. I'd spent 40 years in courtrooms watching criminals face justice. I knew how this worked. I knew the system better than almost anyone. They thought I was just a lonely old woman, easily manipulated or easily destroyed. They thought wrong. I stood up, turned on every light in my condo, and found my phone. I had calls to make, plans to develop, evidence to gather. Carmen had saved me, but I needed to know exactly what they'd planned, what they'd hoped to accomplish. And then I needed to make sure they faced every consequence the law would allow, because I was Eleanor Whitman, former federal prosecutor, and I was about to teach my daughter a lesson she should have learned as a child. Actions have consequences, and you don't get to destroy people, especially not your own mother, without answering for it. The game was on, and this time I intended to win. I stared at Carmen's number on my phone for 15 minutes before calling. The morning sun streamed through my condo windows, casting long shadows across my coffee table. Appropriate, really. I'd almost walked into darkness of my own daughter's making. She answered on the first ring. "Mrs. Whitman." "Carmen." My voice came out rougher than I intended, thick with emotion I was trying to suppress. "I need to know what you heard. Everything." There was a pause. I heard her breathing, heard the sound of a door closing. She was finding privacy. Smart woman. "They were in the library," she began quietly. "2 nights before they sent you that text. I was dusting the hallway upstairs, and their voices carried through the vent." Mrs. Victoria was excited, almost happy. She said, "Once we get the restraining order, everything else will fall into place." My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles went white. "Go on." "Mr. Marcus asked, 'What if you didn't show up?' And she laughed, Mrs. Whitman. She said, 'She'll show up. She's desperate to see her precious daughter.' Old women are so predictable." Carmen's voice cracked, and I could hear tears threatening. Then she explained the whole plan. They would accuse you of attacking her, of violent behavior. The police were already on standby. She'd called them an hour before you were supposed to arrive. Said she feared for her safety because you'd been sending threatening messages. I hadn't sent a single message. The coffee invitation had been one text from Victoria's phone to mine, one way, the first communication in 3 years. "Once they had you arrested," Carmen continued, her voice shaking, "they planned to petition for an emergency psychiatric evaluation, paint you as unstable, dangerous, suffering from dementia or paranoid delusions. Then guardianship, control of your finances, your pension, everything." The coffee in my stomach turned to acid. They wanted to have me declared incompetent, to take control of my entire life. "Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Victoria said you'd be taken care of in a facility somewhere, and they'd finally have what they deserved. She said your pension would cover their debts, and they could sell the house for a profit and start over somewhere new." What they deserved. The house hadn't been enough. The money I'd already given them hadn't been enough. They wanted everything, wanted to lock me away like a broken piece of furniture and drain my accounts while I deteriorated in some nursing home, forgotten and powerless. "Thank you, Carmen," I managed, my throat tight. "You saved my life. You know that, don't you? You were always good to me, Mrs. Whitman. When my son was sick and I couldn't afford his medicine, you were there. You paid for everything. You didn't have to do that. You even helped with his college tuition." Her voice strengthened. "I won't let them destroy you. What do you need?" What did I need? Evidence. Proof. A way to turn their trap back on them and spring it on their own necks. "Stay there if you can," I said. "Keep your eyes and ears open, but be extremely careful. Don't let them suspect anything." "Can you do that?" They'd been so confident, So certain I'd walk into their trap like a lamb to slaughter. Time to show them what a cornered prosecutor could do. I spent the next 4 days watching my daughter and son-in-law. Not stalking, nothing illegal, just observing from public places. A cafe across from Marcus's office building in Soma. A bench in the park near the gym Victoria frequented. The parking lot of the organic grocery store where they shopped. I felt like a detective on a stakeout, except the criminals I was tracking included the child I'd rocked to sleep through countless nightmares. The little girl who'd once thought I hung the moon. Tuesday afternoon, I watched Victoria meet someone at an upscale cafe in Noe Valley. A lawyer, by the look of her. Expensive suit, leather briefcase. That particular air of practiced sympathy attorneys cultivate. They sat in a corner booth, and I positioned myself near the window with a newspaper and reading glasses, close enough to observe. Victoria looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed, pulled back in a messy ponytail. No makeup. She kept wringing her hands, making them red. The lawyer spoke in low tones, sliding documents across the table. Victoria's hands shook as she signed them. What were they preparing? A restraining order application? Probably. Affidavits about my supposed instability? Character witnesses, perhaps? People Victoria would have coached to describe me as aggressive, paranoid, mentally declining. The lawyer left first. Victoria stayed, staring into her coffee cup like it contained answers to questions she was afraid to ask. For just a moment, I saw the girl she'd been, uncertain and seeking guidance. Then Marcus arrived. The transformation was instant. Victoria straightened, plastered on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Marcus slid into the booth beside her, not across from her, beside her, and placed his hand on her arm in a grip that looked possessive, controlling. I watched their interaction with the same attention I'd given to thousands of witness testimonies over my career. Marcus did most of the talking, his lips moving rapidly, his free hand gesturing sharply. Victoria nodded, nodded, nodded like a dashboard bobblehead. When she tried to speak, he cut her off with a touch, a look, a word I couldn't hear but could see the effect of. She was a puppet. My daughter had become a marionette, and Marcus held every string. They discussed something intensely. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read body language, could lip-read fragments. Money, lawyer, evaluation, facility. Each word was a nail in the coffin they were building for me. Marcus's confidence was striking. He sat with perfect posture, his expression calm, almost serene. He believed he'd already won. Why wouldn't he? He'd isolated Victoria from her mother, manipulated her into demanding money, turned that rejection into 3 years of silence, and now orchestrated a scheme to destroy me completely. Classic narcissistic sociopath. I'd prosecuted enough of them to recognize the pattern. But Victoria looked haunted. Her eyes darted around the cafe, never settling on anything for more than a second. Her jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping even from across the room. When Marcus touched her hand, she flinched just slightly before forcing herself to relax. She was afraid, not of me, of him, or maybe of herself, of what she'd become, of the point of no return she was approaching. I felt a flash of pity, quickly extinguished. She'd made her choices. She'd chosen him over me, greed over integrity, lies over truth. Whatever happened next, she'd earned every bit of it. They left together, Marcus's hand on Victoria's back, steering her like a child who couldn't be trusted to walk alone. I waited 10 minutes before following at a distance. Watching them climb into the Tesla I'd helped them buy 3 years ago with a small loan of $40,000 that had never been repaid. That evening, I sat in my condo and made a mental list, the way I used to prepare for complex prosecutions. Evidence needed, Carmen's testimony, financial records showing their debt, documentation of the house transfer, proof of their conspiracy, recordings if possible. Legal avenues. Challenge the house gift as fraudulent conveyance. Criminal complaint for attempted fraud and conspiracy. Civil suit for damages and emotional distress. Professionals required. Attorney, private investigator maybe, though I could do most of the surveillance myself. Financial forensics expert to trace their money troubles. Weaknesses to exploit, Victoria's guilt, her fear, the cracks in their marriage that I'd seen in that cafe, the fact that Marcus was so arrogant, he'd eventually get sloppy. And their biggest mistake, the one that would destroy them, underestimating me. Thinking that because I'd given them a house, I'd give them everything. Thinking that because I'd been silent for 3 years, I'd stay silent forever. They thought I was just a lonely old woman fading away in a small condo, irrelevant and powerless. They forgot I'd spent 40 years destroying people who underestimated the law and the woman wielding it. Margaret Chen's office hadn't changed in the 20 years since I'd last been there. Same sleek modern furniture, same floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district, same air of quiet power. We'd worked together on several high-profile cases when she was a defense attorney and I was prosecuting white-collar crime. We'd maintained the kind of professional respect that comes from being worthy adversaries. Eleanor, she stood when her assistant showed me in, extending her hand. It's been too long. I heard you retired 5 years ago. I shook her hand and sat without preamble. Margaret, I need your help, and I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you is both deeply personal and legally urgent. Her expression shifted immediately to focused attention. Good. I'd always appreciated her ability to cut through pleasantries and get to business. I laid it out cleanly, chronologically, the way I'd present evidence in court. The house gift 8 years ago. The gradual isolation, the money demands. The 3 years of silence. The coffee invitation. Carmen's warning. The police trap I'd narrowly avoided. The overheard conversation about guardianship and financial control. My own surveillance and observations. Margaret listened without interrupting, taking notes in her precise handwriting. When I finished, she sat back and studied me with those sharp attorney eyes. That's attempted fraud at minimum, she said slowly. Conspiracy, potentially false imprisonment if they'd succeeded in getting you arrested on fabricated charges. And the guardianship angle, that's calculated, premeditated exploitation. She tapped her pen against her notepad. But proving it will be challenging. I know, that's why I need your expertise. She nodded. The house gift, that's interesting. In California, we can challenge property transfers made with fraudulent intent or undue influence. If you can prove they planned to exploit you from the beginning, or that there was manipulation involved, we might void the transfer entirely. They were already significantly in debt when they got married, I said. I didn't know it at the time, but I can obtain those records now. That helps establish motive. Margaret made more notes. What about the recent incident? Any evidence besides the housekeeper's testimony? Carmen's willing to go on record. She's prepared to give a sworn statement. That's something, but we need more. Can she obtain recordings? California is a two-party consent state for recordings, which complicates things. However, Margaret's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. If she's having conversations where she's a participant and gives consent, those are admissible. Given that you're technically still the legal owner of the house until a court rules otherwise, there might be grounds to argue you have authority to consent to recordings of conversations happening in your property. I felt a smile pull at my lips, my first real smile in days. That's elegant legal reasoning. That's creative lawyering, Margaret corrected. But Eleanor, I need to be direct about something. This will get extremely ugly. They'll fight back hard. They'll probably accuse you of harassment, of abusing your prosecutorial connections, of being a bitter old woman who can't accept that her daughter has an independent life. The media might get involved. Your reputation will take hits. My reputation? I almost laughed. Margaret, they tried to have me arrested on false charges so they could steal my pension and warehouse me in a nursing home. I think my reputation can handle a legal fight. Fair point. She studied me for a long moment. You understand this isn't about revenge, legally speaking. This is about protecting your rights and holding them accountable for criminal conspiracy. Of course. I met her eyes steadily. Revenge would be beneath me. Justice, on the other hand, is what I've spent my entire career pursuing. I want that same justice for myself. I'll need a retainer. This kind of case, we're looking at significant fees. Money isn't an issue. I've lived modestly for 5 years, saved most of my pension. I want the best possible outcome within the full boundaries of the law. I want them to face every single consequence their actions have earned. Margaret's expression shifted to something that might have been approval or anticipation. Then let's build a case that would make your prosecutorial career proud. Over the next 3 weeks, I became intimately familiar with the machinery of investigation I'd only observed from the other side. Margaret brought in a financial forensics expert named David Kowalski, who traced Victoria and Marcus's money troubles like a bloodhound following a scent. The picture that emerged was damning beyond what I'd imagined. Marcus had come into the marriage with $63,000 in debt, credit cards and personal loans from failed business ventures. Victoria had been financially stable then, with modest savings and no debt. But the spending had started immediately after the wedding. The bathroom renovation I'd funded had actually cost $8,000, not $10,000. The difference had gone to paying down Marcus's credit cards. The roof replacement had cost $18,000, not $25,000. The extra $7,000 had paid off one of Marcus's personal loans. Every request had been inflated, every need exaggerated, all to funnel money toward Marcus's pre-existing debts while hiding the truth from me. Then came the big investment scheme, the cryptocurrency opportunity. They'd approached 6 other people before coming to me. Victoria's uncle, Marcus's parents, 2 of Marcus's business associates, Victoria's godmother, and a family friend. All had been rejected. The pattern suggested I hadn't been their only target, just their most accessible one, the mother they thought they could guilt or manipulate into compliance. "They're drowning," David said, spreading financial records across Margaret's conference table. Between minimum payments on credit cards, the mortgage on the house, car payments on 2 vehicles, and their lifestyle expenses, they're barely treading water. One major expense, and they'll go under completely. That major expense being my legal fees to challenge the house transfer, I said. Exactly. Margaret smiled grimly. The irony is poetic. They tried to steal your money, and instead they're going to spend money they don't have, fighting to keep what was never really theirs. I contacted Carmen again, this time with Margaret present on a secure conference call to explain the recording situation and the legal complexities. "I understand, Mrs. Whitman," Carmen said, her voice steady, despite the dangerous position we were asking her to occupy. "I'll be very careful. They trust me now, or Mrs. Victoria does. She talks freely around me, like I'm a piece of furniture that can't hear or understand. That's their mistake," I said. "People who treat others as furniture forget that furniture has ears, and sometimes those ears are connected to recording devices. 4 days later, Carmen called with audio files that made my blood run cold and hot simultaneously. Mrs. Victoria does. Whitman, I'm shaking as I send these, she said. What I heard, what they said about you? The recordings were crystal clear. Victoria and Marcus discussing their contingency plans, what they called Plan B if I'd somehow survived their initial trap. The word they used, survived, like I was a natural disaster they'd weathered, rather than a person, a mother. In the first recording, which was inside a private bedroom, that recording was crystal clear. The recordings were crystal clear. You have no idea how much I went through them. Vic promised me he'd be there every day, since he has taken my breath out of your body. All of this changed his life, following him a mother, without a doubt. This was a man who reacted to a desperate situation. He lived in fear. Marcus's voice was ice-cold calculation. We'll pursue the incompetency angle anyway. Find a sympathetic psychiatrist. Show them Eleanor's erratic behavior patterns. We'll create some if we need to. Forged emails, manufactured text messages. Old women forget things, right? We just need enough to get a foot in the door for guardianship proceedings. Victoria's voice, hesitant, uncertain, afraid. I don't know if I can do that, Marcus. She'll fight it. You don't know how fierce she can be. Marcus, dismissive and cruel. She's 71 years old and living in a pathetic condo in the sunset. What's she gonna fight with? You're her only family, Victoria. The court will side with us. We'll look like concerned children trying to protect a declining parent. I listened to those recordings 5 times, memorizing every inflection, every casual cruelty, and I knew I had to act. Every calculated manipulation, the absolute certainty in Marcus's voice that they'd win, the fear and compliance in Victoria's voice as she went along with plans she clearly had reservations about, but not enough backbone to resist. They'd forgotten something crucial. I'd spent 40 years learning exactly how the legal system worked, how to build ironclad cases, how to anticipate and counter every defense strategy. They'd brought a plastic knife to a courtroom gunfight. Margaret filed the initial paperwork on a Monday morning, timing it for maximum impact. Petition to void the house transfer based on fraudulent inducement and undue influence. Evidence of systematic financial exploitation. Request for compensatory damages. Simultaneously, we filed a criminal complaint with the San Francisco Police Department. Attempted fraud. Conspiracy to file false charges. Elder abuse under California Penal Code. As I signed the documents, I felt that old brill of a case coming together, pieces clicking into perfect legal alignment. 40 years of prosecuting criminals. Now I'd have to prove my own daughter was one. The papers would be served Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. I could picture their faces when the process server knocked on the door of my house, the house I was going to take back. I'd show them what survival looked like. Detective Sarah Washington had the kind of eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Sharp, assessing, the eyes of someone who'd spent 20 years sorting truth from lies and had gotten very good at it. When Margaret introduced us at the SFPD headquarters, Washington shook my hand firmly and gestured to her office. "Ms. Whitman," she said, settling behind her desk. "Or should I say Ms. Prosecutor? I've heard stories about you. That securities fraud case in '98, the embezzlement ring in '04. You were legendary, inserted period. Eleanor is fine, I said, sitting across from her and noting the case files stacked with military precision, the commendations on the wall, the coffee mug that said world's okayest detective with faded lettering. Organized, Detail-oriented, experienced, and with a sense of humor. Good. Oh, your attorney filed quite an interesting complaint, she continued, opening a folder. Conspiracy, attempted fraud, filing false police reports, elder abuse. Those are serious allegations against your daughter and son-in-law. I met her gaze steadily. And they're all true. I have evidence. Over the next 90 minutes, I walked her through everything, starting from the beginning. The house gift 8 years ago, the gradual isolation, the escalating money requests, the 3-year silence. The coffee invitation after all that time, Carmen's desperate warning, the police arriving at an empty scene, the overheard conversations about guardianship and financial control, the recordings of them planning their backup schemes. Washington listened with that particular intensity good detectives develop when a case starts making sense. When I finished, she sat back and steepled her fingers. Your housekeeper, Carmen Vasquez, she's willing to testify under oath? She's already given Margaret a sworn statement and affidavit. And you have recordings of the defendants discussing their plans to commit fraud and file false police reports? Multiple recordings, all legally obtained. Carmen was a participant in her own home, where she lives and works. California's two-party consent law is satisfied. A slight smile crossed Washington's face. You know your law. I spent 40 years applying it. Now I'm relying on it to protect myself from my own child. Washington made a note. I'll need to interview everyone separately. The housekeeper, your daughter, the son-in-law. Standard procedure. I understand. She called Carmen in first while I waited in an adjacent room, watching through one-way glass as Carmen sat straight-backed in the interview room, hands folded in her lap. She wore a conservative dress, respectful and dignified, and when Washington asked her to describe what she'd overheard, Carmen's voice never wavered. Mrs. Victoria said they needed to get Mrs. Whitman arrested so they could claim she was violent and unstable, Carmen testified, her English accented but perfectly clear. She said once they had a restraining order, they could petition for guardianship. She laughed and said, "Old women are so predictable. She'll walk right into it." Washington took notes, her expression professionally neutral. And Mr. Marcus Chen, what was his role? He planned everything. He told Mrs. Victoria exactly what to say, how to act, when to call the police. She was scared, I think, but she listened to him. She always listens to him, even when she knows it's wrong. Carmen's voice cracked slightly, the first sign of emotion. Mrs. Whitman raised that girl alone after her husband died, worked so hard to give her everything. To see her plan this against her own mother, it broke my heart. After Carmen left, Washington brought Victoria in. I leaned forward, my hands pressed against the glass, watching my daughter enter the interview room like she was walking to her own execution. She looked worse than she had at the cafe. Her skin was pale, almost gray. Dark circles shadowed her eyes like bruises. Her hands trembled as she sat down, and she couldn't seem to meet Washington's gaze for more than a few seconds at a time. "Miss Chen," Washington began, her tone professionally neutral, "I need to ask you about the morning of April 7th. You invited your mother to your home for coffee?" "Yes." Victoria's voice was barely audible, a whisper I could barely hear through the speaker. Why that particular day, after 3 years of no contact? Victoria's hands twisted together in her lap. We thought it was time to reconnect." "We?" Washington's tone sharpened slightly. "You and your husband?" "Yes." Washington let the silence stretch, a technique I'd used myself thousands of times. Let them fill the void. Let nervousness loosen tongues. Victoria fidgeted, tucked her hair behind her ear repeatedly, couldn't keep her legs still. Your mother didn't come that morning, Washington continued. But police were called to your home at 9:53 a.m. Why? I thought I heard someone outside. We got scared. I called for help. Scared of what? I don't know. It was just a feeling. I watched my daughter lie, watched her avoid eye contact, watched her fingers drum against her thigh in that nervous pattern she'd had since childhood. 40 years of watching witnesses testify, and I could read guilt like it was written in neon letters across her forehead. Washington pressed. You called police 20 minutes before your mother was supposed to arrive. The call logs show that clearly. Can you explain that? Victoria's voice broke. I need to talk to my lawyer. I want my lawyer. The interview room door opened, and Marcus walked in, his expensive lawyer trailing behind like an obedient shadow. Marcus moved straight to Victoria, placed his hand on her shoulder with that familiar, possessive grip I'd seen at the cafe, and leaned down to whisper something in her ear. In part distance hiding, but couldn't quite manage, before nodding and forcing herself to relax under his hand. Washington watched this interaction with great interest. So did I. Control, even here in a police interrogation room. He couldn't help himself. He needed to manage Victoria, to keep her on script, to remind her who was in charge. Mrs. Chen. Washington said calmly, I'd like to interview you separately. My client doesn't have to, the lawyer began. My client doesn't have to. I'll talk, Victoria interrupted, her voice stronger suddenly. Ice-cold confidence, flooding in like someone had flipped a switch. I have nothing to hide. Wait, that wasn't Victoria's voice. That was someone else, someone harder. I watched, fascinated and horrified, as my daughter's entire demeanor changed. Her back straightened, her hands stilled, her eyes went cold and flat. They moved Marcus out. Victoria stayed seated, smoothed her skirt with steady hands, and gave Washington a smile that didn't reach her eyes, but looked perfectly believable. Detective, she said, her voice calm and reasonable. I understand you're investigating some complaints from my mother. I want you to know we were simply trying to protect ourselves from her increasingly erratic behavior. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Protect yourselves from what, specifically? Washington asked. Eleanor has been unstable since her retirement, making wild accusations, sending disturbing messages at odd hours, showing up at our home uninvited. We've been genuinely concerned about her mental state. We haven't found any messages from her to you or your husband, not a single text, email, or voicemail in the past 3 years. Victoria's smile tightened microscopically, the only crack in her performance. She's very clever about covering her tracks. That's what makes her concerning. She was a prosecutor, detective. She knows how to manipulate evidence. I watched her perform, watched her deploy that calm, controlled tone, and felt my heart break all over again. She was good at this, better than I'd expected. If I didn't know the truth, hadn't heard the recordings, hadn't witnessed the setup, I might have believed her myself. Ms. Vasquez? Your housekeeper said she overheard you and your husband planning to falsely accuse Eleanor Whitman of assault, Washington said evenly. What's your response to that? Victoria's laugh was dismissive, almost pitying. Carmen? She's always been jealous of me, resentful of my relationship with my mother. I'm not surprised she'd lie if Eleanor asked her to. My mother probably paid her handsomely. We have recordings, Washington said simply. Victoria's lawyer cut in sharply. Illegally obtained recordings aren't... Actually, I murmured to Margaret, who stood beside me in the observation room. They're perfectly legal under California law when one party to the conversation consents. On the other side of the glass, Washington explained the same thing. Victoria's face went very still, though her smile remained frozen in place like a mask that had been glued on. I think, her lawyer said carefully, his voice tight, we're done here until we can review all materials and evidence. After they left, Washington came to find me in the observation room. That was enlightening, she said. Your daughter knows how to perform, but she's scared underneath. You could see it in her eyes, even through all that control. Her husband is the puppet master, I said. She's just the puppet, though that doesn't excuse her choices. The recordings help immensely. I'll forward this to the DA's office for review. But frankly, Ms. Whitman, she paused, choosing her words carefully. This is primarily a civil matter. Your house, your finances, your family relationship. Criminal charges will take time, months probably. The system moves slowly. I know, I smiled without humor. That's why I've also filed a comprehensive civil suit. Multiple fronts, Detective. You always attack on multiple fronts, cut off every avenue of escape. Sounds like something a prosecutor would do. Former prosecutor, I corrected. Now I'm just a mother seeking justice. Margaret and I left the police station together. The California sun felt warm on my face, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something like hope stirring in my chest. They're rattled, Margaret observed as we walked to her car. They should be, but Marcus will fight. He'll hire the best lawyers he can afford, burn through every penny they have. Which means, Margaret said thoughtfully, they'll have nothing left for the house payments, the credit card minimums, the car loans. The whole financial house of cards collapses. Exactly. I stopped at the car, looked back at the police building. Even if they somehow win in court, which they won't, they'll lose everything fighting. They're drowning, Margaret, and I'm the one who opened the floodgates. It felt like justice. No, it felt like the beginning of justice, because the real satisfaction would come in court, under oath, with every lie exposed to harsh legal light and public scrutiny. Tuesday morning arrived with that particular clarity that comes from knowing you're about to fundamentally change everything. I sat in my condo with coffee and my phone, waiting for Carmen's call. It came at 9:52 a.m. They just got served, she whispered urgently. The process server just left. Mrs. Whitman, you should hear them screaming. Hold on, I'm recording. There was a rustling sound as she positioned her phone. Then I heard it through the speaker, my daughter's voice sharp with confusion and rising panic. What is this? Marcus, what the hell is this? Papers rustling, a long, terrible silence that seemed to stretch forever. Then Marcus, his voice climbing with disbelief. Your mother filed a lawsuit. She's actually suing us. She's trying to take the house back. Let me see that. Victoria's voice harder now, crackling with fear. More rustling. Then absolute silence, the kind that comes before explosions. No. Victoria's voice emerged strangled. Disbelieving, terrified. No, this can't be real. This isn't happening. What does it say? Marcus demanded. Read it to me. She's challenging the house gift, claims it was obtained through fraudulent inducement and undue influence. She wants the house back, Marcus. She wants our house back. It's not our house if she wins. Marcus's voice was sharp, cutting. Keep reading. She's also filed criminal complaints, attempted fraud, conspiracy to file false police reports, elder abuse. Victoria's voice rose into something close to hysteria. Elder abuse, Marcus. That's a felony. You said she wouldn't fight back. Victoria was screaming now, all that cold control from the police interview completely gone. You said she was just a lonely old woman who'd accept whatever we did. You said she'd be easy to manipulate. I didn't think, Marcus started. You didn't think? Victoria's shriek was music to my ears, savage satisfaction flowing through me. She's a federal prosecutor, Marcus. She spent 40 years destroying people in court. She knows every lawyer in San Francisco, every judge, every trick in the system. And you said she was harmless. She was harmless. She never fought back before when we asked for money. Well, she's fighting now. Something slammed, fist on table, I guessed. Do you understand what this means? If she voids the gift, we lose the house. The house we took a second mortgage on. The house we've been borrowing against for 3 years. We'll owe more than it's worth. End of sentence. Silence. I imagined Victoria doing the math. Watching her carefully constructed life collapse into numbers that didn't add up. We'll get a lawyer, Marcus said, but his voice had lost that confident edge. We'll fight it. We have rights too. With what money, Marcus? Victoria's voice had gone from rage to something colder, more frightening, more hopeless. We're maxed out. Every credit card, every loan, everything. We spent it all because we thought we had time. We thought we'd get control of her pension and her accounts, and then we could refinance everything, pay it all off. You can't refinance a house that isn't yours. Sang. Her laugh was brittle, breaking into pieces. Don't you see? She's already won. Even if we somehow keep the house, we'll spend everything we have left on legal fees fighting her. We're destroyed either way. She's destroyed us. And the Carmen's voice came through. Barely audible, but playing her role perfectly. Miss Jen, can I get you anything? Some water, maybe? Get out, Victoria screamed. Just get out! Leave us alone! I heard footsteps, a door closing. Then Carmen's voice, clearer now. Mrs. Whitman, I'm in the laundry room. They can't hear me here. I heard footsteps, a door closing. Then Carmen's voice, clearer now. They're not suspicious? I'm safe. Mrs. Victoria is too angry and scared to think about me. She's screaming at Mr. Marcus about how this is all his fault, how he ruined her life. I don't think she realizes I'm the one who recorded her before. She still thinks I'm just furniture. I smiled, cold and satisfied. Keep recording when you safely can. Document everything. This is almost over, Carmen. Just a little longer. After we hung up, I called Margaret. They know. How did they take it? About as well as a house of cards takes a hurricane in an earthquake during a tornado. Margaret's chuckle was deeply satisfied. They'll hire someone. Probably someone expensive and aggressive. Daniel Morrison, maybe. Or Jennifer Kwan. Both handle desperate cases. Let them hire whoever they want, I said. We have the evidence. We have the law. We have the truth. And we have something they don't have. What's that? We have nothing to hide and nothing to lose. They're fighting to keep what was never theirs. We're fighting to reclaim what's mine. There's a difference in motivation there, Margaret. Don't get overconfident, Eleanor. Good lawyers can make weak cases look strong. I'm not overconfident. I'm prepared. There's a difference. That afternoon, I treated myself to a slow drive past the house, my house. I was already thinking of it that way again, already mentally rearranging furniture and deciding which bedroom would be my new office. The Tesla sat in the driveway, Marcus visible through the front window, pacing back and forth with his phone pressed to his ear. Probably calling every lawyer in San Francisco, getting quotes he couldn't afford, burning through the last of their savings on retainer fees. I didn't stop, just drove past slowly like a neighbor enjoying the spring weather, and savored the image of panic I'd created. They'd wanted to destroy me. Now they were destroying themselves, and all I'd had to do was defend myself with the law. 3 days later, Margaret called with news I'd been expecting. They hired Jennifer Kwan, paid her a $40,000 retainer. Probably the last of their liquid assets. She's already filed a response claiming the house gift was valid, your elder abuse claims are baseless, and you're engaging in harassment and abusive process because you're angry about their independence. Standard defense tactics, I said. Deny everything, attack the accuser's credibility, claim victimhood. Exactly. She's also filed a motion to dismiss the criminal complaints, claiming false statements and malicious prosecution, and there's a countersuit. Of course there is. What are they claiming? Emotional distress, intentional infliction of emotional harm, abuse of legal process, and defamation. They're asking for $200,000 in damages. I actually laughed. They're suing me for $200,000 when they can barely make minimum payments on their credit cards? That's either desperation or delusion, maybe both. It's a strategic move, Margaret said. They're trying to muddy the waters, make you look vindictive. Create enough chaos that maybe something sticks. Kwan knows she's losing the main case, so she's creating diversions. Then we ignore the diversion and stay focused. What's our response? We file the complete financial records showing their systematic debt and exploitation pattern, the authenticated recordings showing clear premeditation, Carmen's sworn testimony and affidavit, and I'm requesting an expedited hearing given the property dispute and your age. Elder abuse cases get priority in California. Perfect. And Margaret? Yes? Make sure every document, every filing, every motion is absolutely perfect. I want this case to be a textbook example of how to prosecute fraud. When law students study this in 20 years, I want them to see how it should be done. Margaret was quiet for a moment. You really are going for total victory, aren't you? They tried to put me in a nursing home and steal everything I've worked for. Yes, I'm going for total victory. Anything less would be an insult to every victim of elder abuse who doesn't have the resources or knowledge to fight back. A week later, Carmen called again with an update that didn't surprise me, but still hurt in ways I hadn't expected. They're fighting constantly, she said quietly. Every day, every night, screaming matches that last for hours. Mrs. Victoria blames Mr. Marcus for everything. She says he ruined her life, that she should have stayed close to you, that she should have married someone smarter, someone who didn't lead her into disaster. Is she still cooperating with their legal defense? I think so. But she looks terrible, Mrs. Whitman. She's lost weight, isn't sleeping. I found her crying in the library yesterday, looking at old photo albums from when she was a child. Pictures of you and her and Mr. Whitman before he died. Something tightened in my chest, a fist squeezing my heart. I ignored it, pushed it down deep where it couldn't interfere with what needed to be done. What about Marcus? Cold, calculating. He's planning something, I can tell. He keeps making private phone calls, talking to their lawyer constantly, researching things on his computer and hiding the screen when I walk by. Keep monitoring, but stay safe, Carmen. Don't take any risks. We're too close to the end to have something go wrong now. But Carmen's observation about Victoria crying over old photographs nagged at me for days. Part of me, a very small, very foolish part that I kept trying to suppress, wanted to call her. Wanted to offer some kind of olive branch, some way out of the disaster she'd created. Then I remembered watching from behind that fence as police cars arrived to arrest me for crimes I hadn't committed. Remembered Victoria's torn sweater, her fake tears, her performance as a victim. Remembered the recordings of her agreeing to have me declared incompetent and locked away. No, Victoria had made her choices. She'd chosen Marcus over me, greed over integrity, lies over truth. Now she'd live with the consequences of those choices, just like every defendant I'd ever prosecuted had to live with theirs. I sat in my condo that evening with a glass of wine, my one small indulgence, enjoying the quiet after the storm, and thought about watching their perfect plan crumble into dust. Victoria's face going pale as she read the lawsuit. Her voice cracking as she realized they'd catastrophically underestimated me. Marcus's arrogant confidence evaporating as he understood his victim wasn't weak or helpless. It was more satisfying than any verdict I'd ever won as a prosecutor. Almost as satisfying as the trial would be, because that's where the real justice would happen. In court, under oath, with every lie exposed to harsh light and public record. I raised my glass to the empty room. To justice, I murmured, and to teaching people that underestimating women, especially older women, is a mistake they'll regret for the rest of their lives. The wine was smooth going down, but the satisfaction burned brighter and longer. The San Francisco Superior Court felt like home in a way my condo never had. I'd spent countless hours in courtrooms like this one, presenting cases, cross-examining witnesses, arguing before judges, but this time I wasn't wearing the armor of professional prosecution. I was wearing my best suit and sitting at the plaintiff's table, about to testify about the night my own daughter tried to destroy me. Judge Patricia Morrison presided. Not a friend, but a colleague I'd respected during my tenure in the federal system. She'd moved to the state bench 5 years ago. She was fair, meticulous, sharp as a razor, and wouldn't give me any special treatment just because we'd once worked in adjacent legal worlds. Good. I didn't need favors. I needed justice. Margaret rose for my direct examination, her movements precise and confident. Ms. Whitman, please describe the events of April 7th for the court. I took a breath and began, my voice steady despite the emotions churning underneath. I received a text message from my daughter Victoria after 3 years of complete silence. She invited me for coffee at 10 a.m. at the house I'd given her as a wedding gift. She said she missed me and we needed to talk. I was hopeful. I thought perhaps we could finally reconcile our relationship. I paused, letting that sink in, letting the judge and the packed courtroom absorb the context. "What happened when you arrived at the property?" Margaret asked. I never made it inside. Carmen Vasquez, who had worked for my family for 25 years and continued working for Victoria and Marcus after they moved in, intercepted me at the door. She was terrified, Your Honor. She grabbed my arm and said, "Don't go inside. You need to leave right now. They've set a trap for you." Across the aisle, Victoria sat rigid, her face a careful mask. Marcus stared at his hands, jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. Their attorney, Jennifer Kwan, took notes with aggressive pen strokes. "I trusted Carmen," I continued. "She'd never lied to me in 25 years. I hid behind the neighbor's fence and watched. 5 minutes later, 2 police cars arrived with lights flashing but no sirens. 4 officers emerged and approached the house with their hands near their weapons, like they'd been told to expect violence. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Judge Morrison leaned forward slightly, her attention completely focused. I saw my daughter meet the officers. She'd been crying, or pretending to cry. Her sweater was torn at the shoulder. Mascara streaked down her face. She looked like a victim, Your Honor. And I realized in that moment what the coffee invitation really was. It wasn't about reconciliation. It was a trap to have me arrested on false charges, to create a foundation for declaring me mentally incompetent and seizing control of my finances through guardianship proceedings. Margaret nodded. That's a very serious allegation. Do you have evidence supporting this? We do, Your Honor. Jennifer Kwan jumped up. Objection. The witness is speculating about intent based on observation alone. Your Honor, Margaret said smoothly, we have recordings that will demonstrate intent with crystal clarity. May we proceed? Judge Morrison gestured. Proceed, but keep it relevant. Margaret played the first recording. Carmen's voice provided context, explaining when and where it was recorded. Then, Victoria's voice filled the courtroom, cold and calculating in a way that made my skin crawl. Once we get the restraining order, everything else will fall into place. Marcus, stop worrying. Mother is predictable. She's desperate to see her precious daughter. Old women are easy to manipulate when you know which emotional buttons to push. I watched Victoria's face turn the color of old newspaper, gray and lifeless and defeated. Marcus's hands clenched into fists on the table. Victoria's recorded voice continued, each word another nail in her coffin. We'll tell the police she attacked me. I'll have the torn sweater ready, the tears, the fear. You just have to back up my story. Look concerned and shocked. Once she's arrested, we file for emergency guardianship. We'll claim she's mentally unstable, dangerous to herself and others, suffering from paranoid delusions or early dementia. Marcus's voice on the recording, hesitant but ultimately complicit. What if she doesn't show up? Victoria, impatient and dismissive. She'll show up. I already called the police and told them to be ready. I said I feared for my safety because of her threatening messages. They're expecting my call. The courtroom erupted in whispers and shocked murmurs. Judge Morrison's gavel came down sharply. Order. We will have order in this courtroom. Margaret stopped the recording. Miss Whitman, you never sent any threatening messages to your daughter, did you? No. The coffee invitation was the first and only communication in 3 years. One text from her phone to mine. Jennifer Kwan stood again, her face carefully controlled, but her voice tight. Your Honor, the defense questions the authenticity and legality of these recordings. They were obtained without my client's knowledge or consent. They were legally obtained under California law, Margaret countered immediately. Miss Vasquez was a participant in conversations occurring in her place of residence and employment. She had every right to record conversations she was part of. We have complete documentation of the legal authorization. Kwan's jaw tightened. She knew she was losing this battle, but she had to fight it anyway. Margaret played another clip. Shorter, but even more damning. Victoria's voice again. When the police arrive and she's not there, we'll say she fled after the attack. It adds credibility, makes her look guilty. Then we move forward with the guardianship petition. Once we have control of her pension and her remaining assets, we can finally pay off our debts and live the way we deserve. The way they deserved. On my pension, in my house, while I rotted in some facility, medicated and forgotten. I looked directly at Victoria and Marcus. Victoria couldn't meet my eyes, staring instead at her lap like a child caught in a lie. Her hands trembled visibly, clenched together on the table so hard her knuckles were white. Marcus sat frozen, his carefully constructed mask of respectability cracking around the edges. "So there was your coffee date," I said quietly, my voice carrying in the silent courtroom. "The menu featured my freedom, my dignity, my life savings, and my future. Fortunately, a loyal friend warned me before I could take my seat at that table. A few people in the gallery actually made sounds of sympathy or approval before catching themselves. Even Judge Morrison's expression flickered with something that might have been disgust before she controlled it. Jennifer Kwan tried damage control during cross-examination, but I'd spent 40 years being cross-examined and doing the cross-examining. I knew every trick. Oh, you heard it better than that, Sesh," I corrected. I did forgive myself. I didn't think that qualifies as contentious. You were controlling, withholding financial support when they needed help. End of paragraph. I declined to hand over my entire pension fund to a cryptocurrency scheme I couldn't verify and that they'd already been rejected on by 6 other people. That's called being financially prudent, not controlling. Strong paragraph. You're using your extensive connections in the legal system to wage a personal vendetta against your daughter and son-in-law. Strong paragraph. I smiled, thin and cold. I'm using the legal system exactly as it's designed to be used, to seek justice when someone attempts fraud and elder abuse. If that's a vendetta, then every plaintiff who ever filed a legitimate lawsuit is guilty of the same thing. The law exists to protect people like me from people like them. Kwan couldn't shake me. 4 decades of courtroom experience meant I knew every trap, every trick, every way a lawyer might try to discredit testimony. When I stepped down, I felt satisfied. My testimony had been clear, credible, devastating. Margaret called Carmen next. She testified in her accented but perfectly clear English about overhearing their plans, about warning me, about recording subsequent conversations when I authorized her to do so. She was calm, dignified, unshakable. Kwan attacked her credibility, suggesting jealousy of Victoria, financial incentive to help me, bias from years of employment. But Carmen held firm, her voice steady and strong. I worked for the Whitman family for 25 years. I watched Mrs. Whitman raise Victoria alone after her husband died when Victoria was just 6 years old. I watched her work herself to exhaustion to give that girl every opportunity. When I heard them planning to destroy her, to lock her away and steal from her, I couldn't stay silent. Some things matter more than a paycheck. Some things matter more than keeping your head down. Family should matter most, but when family becomes poison, someone has to speak up. By the time Judge Morrison adjourned for lunch, the damage was done. I could see it in Kwan's posture, in the way Victoria and Marcus wouldn't look at each other, in the way the gallery watched them with barely concealed contempt. "We're winning," Margaret murmured as we left for the break. "We haven't won yet," I replied. "But yes, the truth is a powerful weapon when you know how to wield it." The afternoon session brought financial experts who testified about Victoria and Marcus's debt patterns, their systematic exploitation of the house gift, their desperate borrowing. Judge Morrison took extensive notes, asked pointed questions that made Kwan flinch, and finally announced she'd review all evidence and reconvene in 30 days for her ruling. As we filed out, I caught Victoria's eye for just a moment. Her mask had completely slipped. I saw fear there, raw and desperate and terrified. I saw regret, maybe, or maybe just self-pity for getting caught. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, no sadness. Just a cold, empty space where my daughter used to live in my heart. They came out swinging in those 30 days, fighting like cornered animals with everything they had left. 3 days after the hearing, Margaret called with an update. They filed an amended countersuit, emotional distress, harassment, defamation, abuse of process. They're claiming you're weaponizing the court system to punish Victoria for growing up and becoming independent. The damages request has increased to $350,000. Let me guess, I said. They're also talking to the media? Local news picked it up this afternoon. I just watched the segment. You should prepare yourself. I turned on the TV and found the coverage. There was Victoria on the courthouse steps, wearing a modest dress and that carefully practiced sorrowful expression. "I'm heartbroken," she told the young reporter, dabbing at her eyes with tissue. "My mother, Eleanor Whitman, she can't accept that I'm an adult with my own life and my own family. This lawsuit, these horrible accusations, it's all revenge because I wouldn't let her control every aspect of my life anymore. Because I married someone she didn't approve of. Because I dared to become independent." The reporter, earnest and sympathetic, nodded along. "Some are saying Miss Whitman is abusing her prosecutorial connections and legal knowledge to wage a personal vendetta. How does that make you feel?" "Scared," Victoria whispered, her voice breaking perfectly. "I'm scared of what she might do next. She was one of the most powerful prosecutors in the federal system. She knows how to destroy people. And now she's turned all that power against her own daughter." I turned off the TV before I threw something at it. Bitter old prosecutor abusing her power. Vindictive mother who can't let go. The narrative was being constructed brick by media brick to paint me as the villain in this story. My phone rang. Margaret again. "Don't worry about it," she said before I could speak. "Public opinion doesn't matter in court. The evidence does. Judge Morrison doesn't watch local news. And even if she did, she's too professional to be influenced by it." "But it still stings," I admitted. "I spent 40 years building a reputation for integrity. For fairness. Now my own daughter is destroying it on evening television." "Your reputation will survive this, Eleanor. The truth will survive this. We have recordings of her plotting to commit fraud. We have financial records showing systematic exploitation. We have Carmen's testimony. The evidence speaks louder than any media appearance." But the attacks kept coming, wave after wave, designed to drown me in doubt and chaos. Jennifer Kwan filed a motion claiming the recordings showed signs of editing and manipulation. Never mind that our forensic expert had certified them as completely authentic. Kwan was planting seeds of doubt, forcing us to spend time and money fighting procedural battles. Anonymous complaints appeared, sent to Judge Morrison's office, claiming I was intimidating witnesses and using my prosecutorial connections to influence the investigation. All false, all unprovable, but all requiring responses and explanations that cost time and legal fees. Articles appeared in legal blogs questioning whether retired prosecutors should be allowed to file suits in jurisdictions where they'd once wielded power, whether there was an inherent conflict of interest, whether someone like me had unfair advantages in the system. "They're desperate," Margaret said during an emergency meeting in her office, "throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks, creating enough smoke that maybe people will think there's fire." Is it working? No. but it's costing them everything they have left. Kwan's fees alone are probably $30,000 a month. Legal research, expert witnesses, court filing fees, it's adding up fast. My sources tell me they've maxed out 3 more credit cards just to keep fighting. I should have felt satisfaction at that. Instead, I felt tired. Tired of fighting my own child. Tired of watching the girl I'd raised become someone I didn't recognize. Tired of this whole nightmare. But I couldn't stop now. Stopping would mean they won. Stopping would mean every other elderly parent who'd been exploited by their own children had no hope of justice. Keep fighting, I told Margaret. I don't care what it costs. I don't care how long it takes. We see this through to the end. That's what I wanted to hear. Margaret filed our response a week later. Complete financial forensics showing not just Victoria and Marcus's debts, but a pattern of exploitation going back to their wedding. Bank statements showing the inflated renovation costs, the fraudulent loan requests, the systematic extraction of money under false pretenses. We included records showing they'd approached 6 other people with the same cryptocurrency investment scheme before coming to me, establishing a pattern of attempted fraud. We provided Carmen's testimony in affidavit form, expanded and detailed, along with character references from 20 people who'd worked with me over my 40-year career, attesting to my integrity and mental competence. And we filed additional recordings Carmen had obtained, including one where Victoria explicitly told Marcus, "Once we have guardianship, we can put her in the cheapest facility we can find and keep the difference in the monthly allowance for ourselves." That recording, more than anything else, showed their true intentions. Not protection, not concern, but calculated exploitation of a parent they decided was nothing more than an obstacle to be removed and an asset to be liquidated. When Judge Morrison received all our filings, she scheduled an expedited final hearing for June 15th, just 2 weeks away. "She's seen enough," Margaret said. "She's going to rule quickly, probably from the bench. This case is too clear-cut to drag out any longer." The night before the hearing, my phone rang. Victoria's number. I stared at it for a long time before answering. "Mom?" Her voice was broken, shattered, barely recognizable. "Mom, please, can we talk? Not through lawyers, just us, please." "We're talking now." "Not like this. In person. I need to explain. I need you to understand." "Understand what?" I cut her off, my voice colder than I'd intended. "Understand how you plan to have me arrested? How you wanted to lock me away in a nursing home? How you were going to steal my pension and my dignity? It wasn't my idea. Marcus, he convinced me that you were getting old, that you needed protection, that we were doing the right thing. Don't." The word came out sharp as a blade. "Don't you dare blame this entirely on him. You're a grown woman, Victoria. You made choices. You chose to lie to me, to isolate yourself from me, to plot my destruction. Those were your choices." "I know." She was crying now. Real tears I could hear in her voice. "I know, and I'm so sorry. If I could take it all back, if I could undo everything..." "But you can't. That's the thing about choices, Victoria. You made yours. Now you live with the consequences. That's what I taught you when you were a child, remember? Actions have consequences." "Please, Mom, I'm begging you. I've lost everything. My job let me go because of the scandal. Marcus and I are getting divorced. We're going to lose the house anyway because we can't afford the payments even without your lawsuit. I have nothing left. Please, just drop the suit. I'll sign the house over. I'll do anything. Just please stop." I closed my eyes. For just a moment, I heard the 9-year-old girl afraid of the deep end of the pool. Heard the teenager asking for help with college applications. Heard the young woman thanking me through tears at her wedding. And I remembered torn sweaters and fake tears and plans to lock me away forever. You wanted me gone, Victoria. You wanted me declared incompetent and warehoused somewhere while you spent my money. You get your wish to see me as someone separate from your life, but not the way you planned. I paused, letting my words sink in. See you in court tomorrow. Please, Mom, please don't do this. I'm your daughter. Don't you love me anymore? The question hit like a physical blow, stealing my breath. Did I still love her? I didn't know. I honestly didn't know if the love I'd had for the child I'd raised could survive what the adult she'd become had done. I love the daughter I raised, I said finally. The girl who was brave and honest and kind. But I don't know who you are anymore, Victoria. You destroyed that girl and replaced her with someone I don't recognize. Someone who could plot to destroy her own mother. Love can't survive that kind of betrayal. I'm sorry, but it can't. And strong pause. But stop to it. Break. Maybe it'll, I don't know. I hung up before she could respond. Sat in the dark of my condo and let myself feel the grief I'd been pushing down for months. Grief for the daughter I'd lost. Grief for the relationship that could never be repaired. Grief for the future we'd never have. But grief didn't change the facts. Grief didn't alter the evidence. Grief didn't make what they'd done any less criminal, or my response any less necessary. Tomorrow, justice would be served. And if that meant sacrificing whatever was left of my relationship with Victoria, then that was a price I was willing to pay. Because I was Eleanor Whitman, and I'd spent 40 years teaching people that no one, not even your own children, gets to destroy you without answering for it. June 15th arrived with clear skies and that particular kind of California sunshine that makes everything seem sharper, more defined. I dressed in my best courtroom suit, the navy one I'd worn for closing arguments in my most important cases, and felt the weight of 40 years of legal experience settle around me like armor. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, media in the back rows, legal observers and other attorneys who'd heard about the case. Some of my former colleagues from the prosecutor's office had come to watch. Judge Morrison entered precisely at 9 a.m. We all rose, and I felt that familiar courtroom tension, the moment before everything changes. I've reviewed all submissions, testimony, expert reports, and evidence in this matter, Morrison began without preamble. Her voice was clear and firm. This is my ruling in Whitman versus Chen. The courtroom went absolutely silent. I could hear Victoria's breathing from 20 feet away, rapid and shallow and terrified. First, regarding the petition to void the gift of real property. Morrison adjusted her glasses and looked directly at Victoria and Marcus. The evidence presented shows clear and convincing fraudulent intent from the inception of the marriage. Text messages, financial records, and authenticated recordings demonstrate that the defendants accepted the property gift while simultaneously planning systematic exploitation of the plaintiff for additional funds. Victoria's face went absolutely white, drained of all color. Her hands clutched the table edge, knuckles sharp as knives. When the plaintiff exercised reasonable financial prudence by refusing to hand over her entire pension to an unverified investment scheme, the defendants orchestrated an elaborate conspiracy to have her arrested on fabricated charges, establishing grounds for guardianship and complete financial control. Morrison's voice was steady, clinical, devastating. The gift transfer is hereby declared void ab initio, invalid from the beginning. The property reverts immediately to Eleanor Whitman. The defendants will vacate the premises within 30 days and are enjoined from removing, damaging, or encumbering any property during that period. Marcus made a sound like he'd been punched in the stomach. His carefully maintained composure shattered completely, his head dropping into his hands. Second, regarding damages, Morrison continued relentlessly. The defendants are jointly and severally liable for court costs, all attorney fees incurred by the plaintiff, and compensatory damages in the amount of $125,000 for emotional distress, exploitation, and the attempted deprivation of the plaintiff's civil rights. $125,000 they absolutely didn't have. I watched the number hit them like a wrecking ball. Payment terms will be established through separate proceedings, but the judgment stands and accrues interest at the statutory rate until paid in full. Victoria was openly crying now, not the fake tears from the police trap, but real sobs that shook her entire body. Her lawyer put a hand on her shoulder, but Victoria was beyond consolation. Finally, Morrison's voice took on an edge of steel. I am formally referring this matter to the San Francisco District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. The evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false police reports, and attempted elder abuse is substantial and compelling. This court finds probable cause exists for criminal charges. Morrison's gavel came down like a guillotine, final and absolute. This court is adjourned. The courtroom erupted, media surging toward the exit to file their stories, people talking and excited voices, my former colleagues coming forward to shake my hand and offer congratulations. But I sat frozen, watching Victoria completely fall apart. She was bent over the table, her body racked with sobs so violent they were silent. Marcus tried to comfort her, but she shoved him away with surprising force, screaming something I couldn't hear over the courtroom noise. Their lawyer, Jennifer Kwan, looked shell-shocked, gathering papers with mechanical movements, already probably calculating how much of her $40,000 retainer was gone and how little she'd accomplished with it. Margaret touched my arm gently. Eleanor, we won. Total victory. I know, I said, but I couldn't feel victorious. I felt hollow, empty, like I'd won a war but lost something essential in the process. We left through a side exit, avoiding the media circus. As we reached the parking garage, my phone buzzed. A text from Carmen. Mrs. Whitman, they're back at the house. Mr. Marcus is throwing things, screaming about lawyers and appeals. Mrs. Victoria locked herself in her old bedroom. I've never seen her like this. I think she's having a complete breakdown. Should I call someone? I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Make sure she's safe, but give her space. This is her rock bottom, Carmen. Sometimes people need to hit bottom before they can start climbing back up. Is she ever climbed back up? If this didn't break her permanently, 3 weeks later, the DA called with an update. We've offered plea agreements to both defendants. Assistant DA Rachel Cordero told me. Mrs. Chen gets 2 years supervised probation, 300 hours of community service, mandatory counseling for exploitation behaviors, and a permanent no-contact order protecting you. Mr. Chen gets 3 years probation, 500 hours of community service, mandatory anger management and financial counseling, and the same no-contact order. They both have to pay restitution as determined by the civil judgment. And if they don't accept, then we go to trial on felony conspiracy and fraud charges. They'd be looking at actual prison time, probably 2 to 5 years. Their lawyer knows that. She's strongly advising them to take the plea. Good. Miss Whitman, I have to ask, do you want them to take the plea, or do you want us to push for trial? This is your case as much as ours. I thought about that for a long time. Thought about watching Victoria and Marcus on trial, under oath, exposed and humiliated. Thought about the satisfaction of a guilty verdict. Thought about sending them to actual prison. Then I thought about the girl who'd been afraid of the deep end of the pool, the teenager who'd cried with joy at her college acceptance, the young woman who'd asked me to walk her down the aisle because her father wasn't there to do it. I want them to take the plea, I said finally. I want them to face consequences, but I don't want them destroyed beyond any possibility of redemption. Maybe with counseling, with time, Victoria can become someone I might recognize again. I don't know if I can ever forgive her, but I don't want to make forgiveness impossible. You're more generous than most victims would be. I'm not being generous. I'm being pragmatic. Prison would just make them bitter and hardened. This way, there's at least a chance they learn something. The day they signed the plea agreements, I wasn't there. I couldn't watch that. But Margaret attended and reported back. Victoria could barely hold the pen, Margaret said. She was shaking so badly her lawyer had to steady her hand. When she finished signing, she asked if there was any way she could send you a letter. The judge said it would violate the no-contact order unless you specifically permitted it. And? I told her you needed time, that maybe someday, but not now. She nodded and left. She looks like she's lost 30 pounds, Eleanor. She looks like a ghost of herself. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, but pushed it away. She made her choices. Now she lives with them. That's what consequences mean. 2 months after the final judgment, I stood in the foyer of my house again. My house restored to me by law and justice. The same oak floors, the same crown molding, the same morning light. Everything the same, and everything different. Carmen appeared from the kitchen, smiling warmly. Welcome home, Mrs. Whitman. For real this time. I'd rehired her full-time at triple her previous salary. Fair compensation for extraordinary loyalty and courage. The moving had taken a week. Victoria and Marcus had cleared out in 2.5 weeks instead of 30, taking only what was legally theirs and leaving behind the furniture and fixtures I'd originally gifted them. The Tesla had been repossessed. The life they'd built on lies and borrowed time had been dismantled piece by piece. I settled into my favorite chair on the back porch with coffee and surveyed the garden that had gone wild during my absence. It would take work to restore, pruning and replanting and patient care. But I had time now, time and peace and possession of everything they'd tried to steal. The afternoon mail brought a letter. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting even before I opened it. Victoria's handwriting, the same careful script I taught her in elementary school. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Mom, it began. Just that one word, and my eyes were already burning with tears I refused to shed. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know what I did was unforgivable, and I'm not writing this to ask you to forgive me. I'm writing because I need you to know something, even if you never speak to me again. You were right about everything. About Marcus, about the money, about the choices I made. I was weak and stupid, and let myself be manipulated because it was easier than standing up for what I knew was right. I betrayed you, the one person who loved me unconditionally and sacrificed everything for me. And I have to live with that for the rest of my life. Marcus and I are divorced. He blamed me for losing everything, said I wasn't smart enough to help him succeed, that I should have been able to manipulate you better. I finally saw him clearly, saw what you must have seen all along. I wish I'd listened to you. I wish I'd been brave enough to trust you instead of him. I'm working 2 jobs now, trying to pay off the judgment and the debts we accumulated. I live in a studio apartment in Oakland. It's not much, but it's honest. For the first time in years, I'm living honestly. And it's harder and lonelier than I ever imagined, but it's also cleaner somehow. I think about you every day, about the mother you were, the woman you are, how badly I betrayed all of it. I look at old pictures of us when I was young and Dad was still alive, and I cry because I threw away something precious and irreplaceable. I don't ask for forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I destroyed. I understand that I had the best mother anyone could ask for, and I traded that for money and a man who never really loved me. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so deeply, terribly sorry for everything. Your daughter, Victoria. I read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it in my desk drawer next to the first letter she'd sent. Maybe someday I'd answer. Maybe someday the wound would scar over enough to allow some kind of limited contact, though never the relationship we'd once had. But not today. Today, I had a house to truly make mine again, a garden to restore, a life to rebuild from the ruins of betrayal. The doorbell rang. Margaret, along with 3 of my former colleagues from the prosecutor's office, dropping by for a small celebration. We spent the afternoon on the porch, drinking coffee and wine, swapping stories about cases and justice and how the law works when you know how to use it. As the sun set over the garden I'd planted 30 years ago with my husband, I stood alone on the porch and thought about dinners that were traps, about daughters who chose wrong, about mothers who chose justice over blind maternal love. Victoria had wanted coffee, wanted me seated at a table of her design, consuming whatever poison she'd prepared. Instead, she'd gotten a 5-course meal of consequences, appetizer of legal action, entree of financial ruin, side dish of criminal charges, dessert of divorce and public humiliation. And an after-dinner mint of permanent separation. Not the menu she'd planned, but exactly what she'd earned. I raised my wine glass to the empty air, to Carmen watching from the kitchen window, to the house that was finally and legally mine again. To survival, I murmured, to justice, and to teaching the world that underestimating older women is a mistake people only make once. The evening air was sweet with jasmine from the garden. The house glowed with warm light behind me. Justice had been served completely and absolutely, and I had all the time in the world to enjoy it, to restore what had been damaged, to build something new from what remained. I took a sip of wine and smiled. Not a bitter smile, not even a triumphant smile, just the quiet satisfaction of a woman who'd fought for what was hers and won every single battle. The house stood solid. The garden waited for morning's work. Carmen hummed softly in the kitchen, preparing dinner. And I was home, finally, truly, legally home. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community, so we can bring more truthful stories for you. And as the stars began to appear in the California sky, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The deep, abiding peace that comes from knowing you stood up for yourself, fought back against those who tried to destroy you, and won. Not just in court, but in life. That peace was worth more than any house, any money, any relationship. It was the peace of knowing I'd never have to wonder if I should have fought back. The peace of knowing I'd used every tool at my disposal to protect myself and hold wrongdoers accountable. The peace of a woman who taught her daughter a final lesson, even if that daughter could never truly be her daughter again. Some betrayals are unforgivable. Some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. And mothers who are pushed too far will rise up with the full weight of their knowledge, their experience, and their righteous anger to reclaim everything that was stolen. I was Eleanor Whitman, former federal prosecutor, mother of a lost daughter, owner of this beautiful house, and survivor of a betrayal that would have broken lesser women. But I wasn't lesser. I was exactly as strong as I needed to be, and that was enough.